Welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. I'm Roshan Karyappa. My guest today is Kashyap Deorah, who is a founder, investor, and author. Kashyap has built and sold 3 startups to public companies in India and the US. He has been an investor in startups like Topper and Meesho. He's also an author of a best-selling book, The Golden Tap, which focused on hyper-growth startups in India. If that wasn't enough, he's on to his 4th startup now as a founder with Hypertrack. Hypertrack is democratizing locational intelligence of the order of Uber and the likes to every app in the world through simple APIs. Kashyap spoke about his process of going from idea to product to company, what metrics and milestones entrepreneurs should chase, the nuances of building an API-first company like Hypertrack, how the Indian ecosystem itself has changed over the last couple of decades, and much more. This was a fabulous conversation, and as I was listening to Kashyap, I felt like I was listening to a professor of startups. I think you'll love this podcast, so do stick around. Hey Kashyap, welcome to the Startup Operator Podcast. Thank you so much for making the time.
Hey, thanks for having me, Roshan.
So Kashyap, you've had a fantastic career. You've been a successful entrepreneur many times over. You've been an operator, investor. Could you take us through that journey and how you connect the dots looking backward?
Interesting. Yeah. Well, it's just a journey of curiosity, I would say, being curious about the future. So I guess the process starts with some level of trying to predict and wonder how the future is going to be. And it's usually around technology, right? This has happened. Now what will happen next? And then the next sort of obvious question becomes, what am I going to do about it? So I'll give you some examples. So when I started my first company right out of college, it was 99, 2000, the internet was happening. And the power of the internet to create marketplaces, right? Digital marketplaces was just coming to life. And it's just a very profound phenomenon. Internet itself was, we were lucky to be born in that era where the internet was happening to the world, and then marketplaces. And we started wondering, a few of us, what does this mean for content and intellectual property and ideas? So what if there was a marketplace for ideas? How would that be? So that curiosity became a startup. The next one was, and that was called righthalf.com. Which is still my Twitter handle. That's how much that name meant to me. The next one was called Chaupaati Bazaar. This was in Bombay. At that time, half of India had mobile phones, but only 2% of India had internet, including on the mobile phone, right? And this was 2007-ish. And I was wondering, what does this mean for digital marketplaces as it relates to commerce? How can people buy and sell stuff now that there is this connectivity, right? That wonder led to Chaupaati Bazaar, and then we navigated that. The next one, Chalo, was around commerce was converging. The digital and physical worlds were blurring, and we started wondering, in retail, what impact will this have to our retail experiences that are largely offline? And within that, at restaurants, how could we make the dining experience better through digitization? That led to a mobile payments app, which was then acquired by OpenTable. Similarly with Hypertrack, APIs are changing the way business happens. Not only is there convergence of physical and digital commerce, now there's convergence of, consumerization of SaaS. The consumer businesses and B2B and B2C in some ways are converging. We started wondering how location can play a huge role in automation in businesses. And a lot of businesses which are on the move want access to similar technologies as Uber, DoorDash, Instacart, and the likes, but they don't have the same kind of war chest. What if we democratize that technology? And similarly with investing as well, Roshan, it's the same journey. You sort of wonder about the future of the world, and then you go, well, you can only do one startup idea at a time. So you sort of get gravitated towards entrepreneurs who see the world similarly, or in fact, they see it in a way which just makes you wonder, oh, wow, that's worth betting on. That kind of makes sense, right? That thinking that that's where the world is going, and betting golden years of your life and money on that, uh, is a huge step. So how can I do multiple companies at a time? It's by investing, right? So pick your favorite idea and do it, and pick your next 10 favorite ideas and invest in it.
Right. All of it sounds so simple, but of course, simple is not easy. For those of us who are listening, how does one go from idea to product to company? What are your zero to end steps in that regard?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a very difficult process. Difficult in the sense it's hard, and the hard part is to do the right thing. Just the courage needed to do the right thing. I think most of us know what the right thing is, but then we negotiate with ourselves, and life happens, and then we end up saying, oh, that other thing is a better thing to do just because it's more convenient, or it's safer, or lesser risky. Uh, Otherwise, the process is really simple. The difficulty is in the courage required to do it. So maybe I can give some more examples there. So, um, you know, uh, so you start with predicting the future, and there has to be a genuine sense of wonder around that. And usually for people, that ends up being around some market space, right? Um, Either coming from the past or coming from in some lateral way, but you really need to discover what is it about the world that fascinates you. And then in that, you wonder about what the future is going to be, where the puck is going to be. And, and so far in this process, you're just a viewer, right? You're just showing up at a beach to see the waves, right? You've predicted that the tide is going to be high at this time, at this part of the ocean, and then you show up. The next step is now to get in the water and surf it. And of course, there's fear of death there, right? You will get slammed. The waves are going to crash, and it's really fun when you surf it, but it's horrible when you get slammed. And for many entrepreneurs, for many people, a failure of high magnitude can be just career changing and personality changing, personality altering. And you're really putting yourself out there, right? Any new company that you start, or any major investment that you make, you are sort of taking a risk, and the chance of failure is very, very high. In fact, most often you're going to fail. So relationship with failure becomes a very important determinant to how long you persist. So the second step is really to jump in and figure out the right technique to ride that market. And that's what I would call a product, right? You have a starting thesis, but once you get in the water, usually the starting thesis is just that, it's a starting thesis. You learn a lot when you actually build the initial product to ride that market wave. And there, the technique to really get the product right is watch your users use the product. And in that, I want to sort of clarify that listening to your users can mean two different things. Can mean watching them use your product, or can mean hearing the feedback from the users. And both are important, but watching them use the product is far more important to make decisions. Because most often users don't know what they want. If you ask them, they will tell you. But often, if you build what they told you, they won't use it, right?
Right.
Because they're just trying to answer the question from.
It's like that Henry Ford quote, right? I mean, if I asked people what they wanted, they would say faster horses. So
That's right. Yeah, faster horses who poop less, right? And and that's exactly how uh, the process is. So first you wonder about the future of a market, then you sort of gather the courage to ride it, and then once you're in it with a starting thesis, you just use users as a north star to navigate. And
Right.
um, and two things can happen, right? One is your user remains north star and your product then keeps changing to give the user what they want, and often don't know uh, until they actually get it and use it. Or in this journey you realize, oh, I'm chasing the wrong user. That also happens very often, right? More often than people give it credit for. You have a market thesis. If one user doesn't get you to it, maybe another user will get you to that same market thesis. That happens very, very often. And we can talk some more about that
Yeah.
in later in the conversation. But yeah, so that's how I would break it.
Right.
Be curious about the market and make a bet, and then have a starting point of a product and make a bet, and then just watch the users use the product and keep sort of building.
This episode is brought to you by Mulya. You want to move fast? Sure. But without breaking things? Now that's a hard ask. The thing is, once you have some base of users and customers, you just cannot afford to risk quality. So how do the likes of Cred, Swiggy and Curefit, some of India's fastest growing startups, ship at lightning pace and delight their users and customers? Simple, they're working with Mulya as a strategic quality partner. Mulya is India's most talented and passionate community of testers. They've helped prevent thousands of bugs and regression issues. So, as a CTO or a product owner, if you want to reduce tech debt, especially while you scale, do check out Mulya.com. I've interviewed Mulya's founder and CEO Pradeep on the podcast earlier, and we spoke about how startups can improve quality while scaling and things to that effect. You should definitely check it out. I'll link to it in the description below. Now back to your regular programming.
Back from there.
Sure. Actually, let's talk about the market itself, right? Because I think that's an important criteria that you brought up. Most often founders are, problem solvers, right? I mean, they experience a problem and they want to build a solution to it, and they think that, enough number of people will want it, right? Something to that effect. But in all of this, I think picking your market and really like figuring out things like, how much would people pay for something like this? What are the other, sort of components in that market, the stakeholders, priorities, etc., becomes pretty important, right? Let alone the TAM itself, right? Because arguably every market is pretty big enough these days, given how the whole SaaS economy itself has grown. So how would you advise on picking that market consciously and having the conviction to win in that market?
Yeah, sure. I think this is where your dots connecting backward metaphor really holds. In general, what happens is if you really start top down and say, hey, which market, you end up not succeeding as an entrepreneur because it's not very relatable. It's very macro, it's high level, it's esoteric. And then, the reason you end up choosing a market is because you think it's larger. You think that the investors think it's large, which means you're doing it to raise money faster, etc. But then once you have the money, then you're confused. What problem am I solving for the world? On the other hand, you find a number of success stories where the entrepreneur goes, "Oh, I faced this problem in my life," or some loved one faced this problem in my life, or someone in my office, or I was selling to a bunch of customers and they faced this problem and I said, oh, this is an unsolved problem. I was solving it for myself, or I was solving it for someone I cared about. And then I found that there are a lot more people with the same problem. And then I discovered that market, right? So you don't find the market finds you type of thing. So, but when you look at it in hindsight, that's what happens. It's usually the market that, what's the phrase? Ikigai, I think, where you find that center, right? Where you're good at it, the market is rewarding enough, people are going to pay you enough for it, and you're also passionate about it.
Right.
It usually is a process of discovery, because a lot of that, at least 2 out of 4 components of that ikigai are coming from within. And what's coming from within is a sum total of your past context. So the market will find you, right? I mean, my fascination for internet, e-commerce, marketplaces, and let's say code, right? Technology, scale stuff is, it's all, 20 years of life's work that's led to a strong connect with those patterns.
Right.
And, for people who are consumer business people, or those who are media people, or those who are, you have different fascinations. I know people who just cannot leave social networking as a realm. Their form of expression as product entrepreneurs is the social network. And that's, they have such deep knowledge there that they'll just keep going deeper in there. So
Right.
did that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, what you're trying to say is that, it also matters why you, right? I mean, arguably any market could
Yes,
be lucrative, but it also matters how you are uniquely positioned to kind of win in that market, essentially, right? So, right,
exactly. And half of it is external. I would say 51% of it is internal,
right.
at least.
Right. So, you've been a founder. I mean, you are a founder now. You've been an operator, investor, and all these three worlds. They I'm sure they bleed into each other, right? I wonder how it shapes your perspective. Having sat in, having worn those different shoes. How does it influence your perspective as a founder today?
Great question. So, I think in my mind, there's just one persona. I'm an entrepreneur, and and you're exactly right about it. Bleeds into other stuff. So whenever I found opportunities to go run a large company, for example, or to go become a professional investor in a pretty good capacity, that's when the answers sort of come in. What do you really want to do? And I realized in all those moments that, I really want to express myself through building a business around a market thesis that I have, and I just get my pleasure from watching customers use my product and um, get value from it. Right, that's the most gratifying part. And the way my investments and my writing helps shape all that. It helps me snap out of my reality into all these lateral realities. Look at the world from other people's perspectives. So that is one, and the other is it's very energizing. I think writing as a separate process and investing as a separate process. The energizing part about investments is you get the founder energy, right? And being a founder is often a very lonely place to be. Sure, you have your team, they're entrepreneurial, and they're there because they want to be part of that journey. But you often need that founder energy to keep you going, and talking to other founders and listening to them, interacting with them, having them call you saying, "Hey, here's the problem I'm facing," and you secretly chuckle and go, "Oh, that's exactly what I'm facing right now," or "That's exactly what I faced at that time, and it just felt horrible. I thought the world is going to collapse, but I'm glad you called me," right? So it's actually quite energizing to both ways, to help founders to understand their problems, to understand their energy and what's working for them. And on the writing side, it's just it's another form of creation where you do something and very quickly get feedback on what's working and not working. So that feedback loop of trying to read the audience, writing something they would find insightful, and then getting quick feedback about whether you got it right or not. That's, in some sense, every piece of writing is a small product, and the best kick that you get as a product person is seeing users use it and tell you what they think of it. And even failures are actually energizing because you kind of learned from it, because you have a thesis and you got to know whether it worked or not, right? It's like a stand-up comic making a joke, and
Right.
on stage, then in that moment whether it worked or not. And even being bombed, just bombing on stage is somewhat
Character building?
liberating. it's liberating. Now you have the answer, right? So you have this burning curiosity, and boom, then you have the answer.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Now, you've had more than a couple of exits, right? And I was curious about how life changes post acquisition. How do you find new purpose? Because in a lot of the ways, it's like culmination of a journey, right? From founding to exit. So, what do you do post exit?
Look, post exit, yeah, I've done it so many times now that that's the most popular area of advice that I get calls from friends and from entrepreneurs. And you know as much as um, exits are financially rewarding, exits sort of give you the impression that you get a larger canvas, because it's usually they're buying you for your product and team with a shared sense of purpose and vision. And then um, a larger company buys you and you go, well, there's more world to change and to influence through this company. um, but from the inside, it's a loss of identity. I think that's the phrase that repeatedly comes to mind.
Wow.
Is you are losing the moment you get acquired. The faster you come to terms with the fact that you are becoming part of them, and now their vision, their purpose, their values, their everything is now your identity. um, the lesser painful the journey for everybody. um, and the more you try to go into a larger setup and conserve or evangelize your identity, you're wasting your time and energy and emotion, and others' time, energy, and emotion. So I think by in the first acquisition, I really, that's where I bombed, and I learned this. And second acquisition, I was better at it. By third acquisition, it was piece of cake. And by that time, I had enough financial freedom now that I said, okay, what do I want to do? Do I want to start more companies and sell them? Do I want to operate a larger company and get more comfortable? Because I think I have the skills for that now. Do I want to become a professional investor? And the answer was actually none of the above. The answer was, I want to build a company which is a great company and has um, fantastic impact and stays longer than I do, right? And with every acquisition, I think that was the unfulfilled dream that still lives on. Saying, look, do I want to make more money from this money? Do I want to enjoy life with this financial freedom, or what is my true calling here? And for me, it was, I want to build a great company which lasts beyond me.
Fantastic. Now, you've done this journey so many times, right? I mean, you're on to your fourth startup right now, and you've gone from idea to product to company four different times. Uh, I'm sure that you would have sort of abstracted certain principles that work for you, right? In terms of, hey, what metrics should I chase? What milestones should I reach? Who should I work with? What should I not do? Etc. Right? Or when should I pick up funding, etc. All of those things. Would you be able to
Yeah.
summarize like some three or four key principles on startup building itself?
Sure. So, four where I have gone through it deeply as my own company, another half a dozen to a dozen working for other companies, either at the early stage, um, working for the entrepreneur, or post acquisition, working for the buyer of my company. And there too, there were product life cycles. And then a good number of investments where you're sort of more from the outside, watching entrepreneurs do it and apply certain patterns. And I would say, you know, uh, there are different kinds of approaches. My approach is very product centric, and that's what I gravitate towards, is building products which have technology scale, and have a product driven go to market, and similarly investing in companies that are of that nature. And in that, um, it's basically usage, growth of usage, and engagement by the users. So it's not just, there's the usage metrics, and then there's the averages and ratios, which are more important than the absolute numbers, right? So your user engagement metrics end up being the most important. Any other metric you optimize for at whichever point in time, you need to know why you're optimizing for that at that point in time. But the more constant metric that amplifies every other metric is usage and user engagement.
Right. There's actually a preponderance of playbooks and so on and so forth, right? Especially with SaaS now. I mean, there is also all kinds of strange formulas, right? Like 3x, 3x,
Yeah.
2x, 2x, all of those things. And in some sense, okay, I mean, it gives founders a North Star to aspire to. It, shows them what path to go towards and what people have done before. But also, in some
Yeah.
sense, it can also be it can confine them in spaces that they don't really sign up for, or they might want to chart a different course, right? So when a founder is starting up, how would you say they should decide between these things, like these benchmarks and whatever? So what percentage
Yeah.
of their time and energy should actually be devoted into chasing these milestones and whatnot?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I think two different parts of the question that I got. One is playbooks, the other is milestones. And, you're right that a lot of playbooks around, and it gets very confusing which one to pick at what point in time. And the playbooks are all very contextual. So right now I'm reading playbooks on go-to-market strategies for usage-based pricing in SaaS products. And it's a lot of it is just fascinating. It's stuff that is making me change my business strategy or tweak my pricing strategy or tweak the way I even build my team structurally. Now, let's say 6 months ago or 1 year ago, if I did not have a strong product which has found some degree of market fit as demonstrated by a certain level of usage metrics and usage growth or user engagement, then this playbook would be irrelevant, right? You can't, until you find that traction, go to market is useless. Or said differently, until you find some product market fit, uh, doing any sales, marketing, and biz dev is kind of useless. You just obsess about getting to product market fit. And once you're there, then you have to obsess about, right? So then you have to read in pre-product market fit, you have to read playbooks around how do you get to product market fit. And there's a lot of great work around that, which is industry specific, domain specific. So look, I think the process of learning from others' experiences is great. You in the right context, pick the right playbook, and you'll save yourself months, if not years, of effort. But on the other hand, if you pick the wrong playbook at the wrong time, right? We hadn't, while we were architecting our product, we really got into the whole serverless architectures thing, and in hindsight, that was overdone, right? That was not right for our context at the time. Because if I look at how much of that stood the test of time, not a whole lot of it, right? Does that mean those concepts are invalid? No, it just means that they were a bit out of context for us. So that's sort of, what I would say about playbooks. They're useful, but you need judgment around which one to apply at which context. And they can be extremely harmful if applied incorrectly, and very, very, company defining if applied in the right context. And I don't know of a good playbook around judgment for which is the right playbook to deploy. But
Right.
that's, a lot of that is a judgment, discretion of the entrepreneur. And the other part of the question was more around how much time
Milestones.
should you be chasing milestones. And I would say if you know pick the right metric, it feels like the right metric, it has stood the test of time, I would say I like running things in a very goal-oriented way. So just obsess about hitting those milestones and get the team to obsess about hitting those milestones. It'll go a long way. It just
Right.
snaps everything to focus. So just more context there is, in any startup, you always have a million things to do, but you can only do 5, right? Because limited resources, limited time, limited money. Which 5 do you pick? Um, it's very hard to constantly reason about it, especially with a group of people. And you can. There are many psychological fallacies that can lead you astray. So it's important to have milestones, have the right metrics that everybody can rally around, and each one brings their own style and personality into hitting that metric. So as long as we agree on the metric, then let diversity be unleashed, right?
Right. Actually, that's a very important point. I mean, picking that North Star metric for your team means that
Yeah,
a lot of the decision making gets simplified, right? Because people know exactly what to prioritize, irrespective of what
yeah.
function they belong in, whether it's product or marketing or whoever else, right? So, I think that is
Exactly.
a, yeah.
Yeah, and it also becomes decentralized. So
Hmm.
the the progress of a company is the sum total of progress of every team member, and uh, and the biggest determinant of progress is the decisions you make, the choices you make. So if more team members are by themselves organically making more choices that align you to the same milestone and goal, you will progress faster.
Right. Okay. So let's talk about your current company, Hypertrack, right? What led you to founding Hypertrack? I know you mentioned that you want to democratize that product layer to a wider base of people, right? Wider base of companies, right? So also, if you could talk about what exactly Hypertrack does and some of the popular use cases that you serve.
Absolutely, yeah. So, we see the role of location in automation of businesses quite significantly. So, location has become a core sort of soul for every business which has assets on the move. Deliveries, field visits, transportation, supply chain, ride sharing. Um, you know, Anything that moves with commercial value can do a ton of automation using location that makes their business more efficient, their fleet more productive, their business more trustworthy, their customers happier, um, their CFO happier about saving money or knowing better how money is being spent, etc. So the journey for me sort of began with e-commerce and on-demand commerce, where I was even before there was Uber and you know uh, the, the on-demand commerce revolution. I was part of Future Group, thinking about how the digital and physical worlds are converging. Right? How is the offline shopping experience getting better with the online experience? How can the online experience get better with offline, and what those contours look like? So my entry into this was, I'm seeing that more business is becoming converged and more on demand. And it's phones, you press a button, stuff comes to you. A lot of things move in the physical world for that to happen. And um, I sort of saw that market wave of this tide is going to sort of keep rolling in for the next many decades. Right? This is how business is going to happen, and it's going to cut across industries, cut across regions. It's not just app companies. Even every traditional company will require uh, this kind of way of doing business. Right? Banks will want um, people to visit customers on demand. Uh, why do you have to come to the office? Stay where you are, and if you have to visit customers, go straight there. A lot of financial services, brokerage, consumer services. Um, you know, uh, every space, every industry that I saw that it was moving towards that sort of physical digital convergence. Um, Call it digital transformation, call it digitization of those industries, and then the question became, what's the shovel I can build for this gold rush, right? If I can see this, what's the best product to come in with? And For me, that finding location as that soul was more of a top-down journey, which is atypical. Like I was talking about earlier in the conversation, it's usually, entrepreneurs start with, I was facing this problem, I built it for myself. I've done logistics, supply chains, e-commerce many times over in my life, but it wasn't a bottom-up connection with location for me. It was more of a, I I can see this on-demand commerce being the way of doing things across industries and geographies. What's the shovel I can build for that gold rush? And location just stood out as that's the area where very few companies in the world have invested war chests into building that infrastructure and building that capability. And they're clearly reaping the benefits of it. And it's all coming from the location infrastructure they've built. So how can I do that for everybody else? For every Uber, there are 1,000 to 10,000 other companies which need the same technology, but it's not available to them. And for them to build it out of smartphone OS, Android and iOS, plus cloud technologies, whether it's AWS, GCP or Azure, and maps, whether it's Google Maps or Mapbox, Here Maps, Esri, whatever, you've got to take these different components and stitch stuff together for simple use cases like order tracking. Where's my pizza? How is my field spending their time? How can I use location data to allocate work and route things better? How can I pay out based on miles and time spent automatically without having to ask them for odometer readings, right? So these are simple things which lots of businesses needed, and to build those simple things was just harder than it needs to be from more primitive technologies, and therefore Hypertrack.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that really hit me, when I started building products first was uh, how everything that we assume is so ubiquitous, right? Messaging, for example, which I tried to build and really, really suffered, right?
Yeah.
Is actually not so trivial at all. I mean, it takes a lot of product chops to actually do these things at scale, right? So it's
Yeah.
fantastic that I mean, people can simply plug and play all of this locational intelligence and so on, right? And be as good as Uber at something, right?
Yeah.
Um, so the first version of the product that you put out in the market, it didn't go as per plan. Could you talk about that journey and pivoting from there, what you learned from there, and how you're building right now?
Sure. Sure. So, this was the first time that happened in my entrepreneurial career that the market was there, um, but the product and the product intuition was there, the product vision was there, but the product execution was not there. And it took me a while to figure out, to first of all reconcile with that, to become humble to the fact that we failed to deliver a quality product and meet the market where it's at, and then to take corrective action to get there. So usually, what happens in product journeys is you've got the product wrong. It doesn't meet the market. You have to tweak that, or you read the market wrong. The market's not there, right? And that's the most fatal blow. If the market's not there, no matter what you do, it's not going to work. And if the market is there, no matter how many times you mess up, ultimately you will have to give up to accept failure. The market will not let you fail, right? So in case of Hypertrack, I think the market was always there. We knew what product to build for the market. There was always enough users to watch and figure it out. But the way we built it in the first version was we built it as application software. And I think that's because all my previous companies have been application software. Most of the people I was working with in the room had built application software. And that's the only way we knew how to build it. And then we realized that this is actually cloud infrastructure. This is infrastructure software. People are, any API company, I would argue, is infrastructure software. Applications are looking at you as the operating system or as the core capability or as a microservice that they can ride on. And you have to be just, built that way, that, it's not an application that you're integrating with, it's an operating system on top of which you're um, building your application. So I think that was really the failure. Is there was an architecture failure. The way it showed up was the product would not work. There would be P0, P1 issues. We would not know what's going on. Sometimes for several days, we would not know what's going on. So we were not able to fix the problem. And then by the time we got some external help to diagnose the problem for us, we realized, wow, this is a fairly deep architecture change that needs to be done. Now, overlay that with every startup in the world is imperfectly architected, right? When you're starting, time to market is of the essence. So that part was confusing, right? That, of course, I mean, you always have your V2 and V3 better architected than V1, but this one was substantially different. It needed, as an API company, it needed to be good enough to support the business up top and the growing business up top. And that's where we failed. And it took us not just a different product architecture, but a different team altogether to do it. And change in team, change in location mid-flight is very, very hard. It can often bring down companies, right? Because really, a company is the team. And I would say, starting with the architecture fail to then leading to essentially that team failed, and we had to sort of redo from scratch. That was a big humbling learning for me.
Right. Yeah, I guess especially in the enterprise, there's some sort of an app fatigue, right? Because they don't want to use another app and integrate with their
Right.
whatever that they're using, I guess. So at this point of time, you're an API first company, right? As you mentioned, you don't have an app, but offer infrastructure and services that can be consumed essentially.
Yeah.
What are some nuances of such a company? As you're building it, what are some of the things that you're discovering that is different from, as you said, like an application software kind of a company or
Yeah.
product?
Sure. So I would say couple of things. One is, you remember the phrase end-to-end solution, and it was a big deal in enterprise software about a decade ago. Still is. The new phrase that people use is digital transformation and so on. But the end-to-end solution is a thing, and there you're basically counting on, you're buying some piece of enterprise software or B2B software, and it does all parts of a function fully, right? You just implement it, and it does the job for you. And what that does, though, is you're priced as a full platform. You got to license the whole thing, right? You can use lesser parts of it, but that's the breakage sort of, for the company. But you're really priced for that. The antithesis to that is the way the cloud providers are priced, right? So AWS would have more than 300 different managed services now, and you can choose whichever one you want. It's a huge menu. If you want to go only use EC2, only use S3, I don't know why you would want to do that, but if you do, you can, right? AWS allows you to do that. Now that led to this, usage-based pricing sort of revolution, where you've got all these parts where it's the antithesis to end-to-end solution. It's actually like you have all these microservices on a platter. You use the one you want to the extent that you want. There's no commitment. There's no annual contract. You use as much and ramp up, ramp down as much as you want when you want, right? And it turns out that the more flexibility you give people, the more they reward you with revenue, right? So just as Google AdWords was like, while newspapers are selling front page ad for X million dollars, or Super Bowl ads for millions of dollars, that's the state of the business. Along comes Google and says, pick a keyword, pick your bid, at least 1 cent. Mind boggling, right? And now look at which is the largest advertising company in the world. So the more you give choice and control and power to the people, they will use it right, and they will reward you for it. So I think that's the sort of biggest shift with APIs is, these are sort of cloud technologies where you handing off power and control back to the user. I think the other phrase that comes to mind is creation economy. So, you look at all companies and users as creators. They're building value, and how do you sort of enable that and ride that sort of wave? So that's one answer to your question. The other is more sort of lost my train of thought here, but it's the build versus buy question, right? Where I think it was the Twilio founder who said it's not build versus buy, it's build with or buy. Twilio won because more companies wanted to build rather than buy. It's a different, more sort of Alex Smart way of saying the same thing about end-to-end solution versus, right? If I'm building a delivery management solution on my own, I am going to use AWS. I am going to use Google Maps. I am going to use 5 other cloud technologies or managed services, right? But I'm still building. A builder needs tools. You're not going to start with a hammer and a chisel, right? You are going to start with some more sophisticated tools. And depending on what you're building, you're going to use more sophisticated tools. So I look at APIs as that, right? So the classic build versus buy, I would dissect into, are you buying application or are you building the application? And if you're building the application, there is a different set of things that you could build on your own or buy. And there you really have to decide what's core to your business and what's not. And a lot of the infrastructure layer of the application you're building ends up being an easy buy decision, especially if it's priced if it's unbundled and priced in a way that you only pay for what you use.
Right. So, you're selling to developers and product folks essentially, right?
Yes. Yes. So go on with your question, but there's far more nuance there, which again, we've learned over the years.
Right. So, we find that especially solutions focused at this market, right, at developers, product folks, has kind of exploded over the last decade. You're seeing a lot of, as you said, build with kind of a solutions coming up, right? So I was wondering, what are some unique characteristics of selling to these folks? I mean, do they evaluate you more stringently? Are they tighter on the purse strings because they feel that at some level they can build it themselves? Was just wondering, 2-3 characteristics that you've noticed.
Yeah, both of what you mentioned hold. So, when we started the Hypertrack journey, we were sure that it's a developer first kind of buy, and we ended up being wrong. So, and I'll tell you how. So we had developers signing up using it. The largest sort of user base of Hypertrack at the top of the funnel is indeed developers, and we found that the first X number of customers, we found that the buyer is someone from the development team, but it's usually the engineering manager or the product manager or the entrepreneur in case of a small company, but it's usually the technology buyer, the same person who's buying big technologies within, the person who's buying AWS, the person who's making your cloud technology decisions, right? Whose card is being the same card that is being swiped for any big technology decision, which is usually made by the technology leader, is the same person who's making the Hypertrack decision. So, but because the developer who's actually writing the code, the mobile developer, the backend developer, the front-end developer, we have all these touch points. We got confused that they were the primary buyer to focus on. But often that did not translate to business, or that gave us sort of wrong signals and confusing signals.
Yeah. So who's actually using your solution is not the guy who's paying for the solution, essentially.
Correct. And then the pendulum, exactly, you're right. And then the pendulum swung to the other side. We said, oh, the developer is building for the ops manager. Sure, the CFO is involved, the product manager is involved because there's a customer delight angle. It's really the person who owns the fleet, the person who's in charge of the logistics, the person who is accountable for all the stuff happening on the field is the person who is being delivered to. He's the consumer of this use case or this value, right? That's where the business value sits. And then we failed again. We realized that the ops manager is not our buyer, because if the ops manager is buying, that person is going to not go through the technology team at all. They'll go straight to buying an application, buying a dashboard, and deploying that end-to-end solution. Actually, they're the buyers of the end-to-end solution, right? And for them, they're going to squint and say, wait, API, you want me to do work for you? What's the point, right? I'm coming to you with the business problem. Why are you asking me to build stuff? So then we found, wait, what's happening here? Is the market not large enough with the build side? But we thought that was exactly where the market is. And then the answer came that, okay, so your technology leader is often the manager of the development team, but is buying for a whole different set of reasons than the developer, and is buying for a whole different set of reasons than the ops manager. So then we mapped out, this is what the ops manager wants. It's important for us to know because that's the product that the tech leader is delivering, the buyer is delivering to the ops manager. These are things that the developer cares about. We need to be aware of that, but that's not going to win us. That won't be sufficient to win us the business. And these are the things that the technology leader cares about. So what does the tech leader care about? They care about time to market. They care about the cost to build and the cost to operate. So is it going to be cheaper than if I build it on my own? Will it be a better overall solution? So if I can get it to market cheaper and faster and with a better product, why would I not use this, right? And do I have flexibility in paying as I go? So that's the technology leader's decision making. Yes, the developer wants to know how is the battery efficiency, how is the accuracy, how is the real timeness, how does that compare with if I was to build on my own? How hard is it to integrate? Is it well documented, right? And what happens in this scenario on this operating system, on that network, in this kind of use case, right? So these are things developers care about. We need to cater to that. And then ops manager cares about, where is time being spent on the field? Where are the bottlenecks? How can I be more efficient? How can I deliver more with the same number of resources? How can I avoid pilferage and exceptions and no-shows? And how can I delight customers, right, with a great service experience? So it's a confusing set, and when you're delivering all of this value, who is the buyer and what is that buyer's journey to buy is the most important thing. So hopefully this example sort of shed some light on, right. You could be an API company, you could be a developer centric company, but that's still different from, let's say, a Stripe or a Twilio, which is just so horizontal that a developer using it is the sale, right? Developers, the buyer in some sense. And it is still substantially different from an application end-to-end solution company, which your business people would buy. There's just a lot of nuances into, right, these API companies could have different buyers.
That's actually fascinating, because what you're saying is follow the trail. Even if you are actually selling to developers, or developers are actually using it, follow the trail to find the end utility, right? Who actually benefits from this particular API being consumed in the end, right? So yeah, that's pretty fascinating. Every business was kind of put to the test last year when COVID happened, and considering also that you in some sense you operate in the operations or logistics kind of a space, and that came to a complete halt, right? So I was wondering, how did your business change last year, and what did you learn from that?
Sure. So two things happened, right? One is more deliveries. Um, People stayed where they were, and things came to them instead of them going to things. And second thing that happened was more automation, lesser manual things, more technology people sitting at their desks, automating stuff, building stuff. So those were both sort of tailwinds that got accelerated for us. Um, we operate in in a market where deliveries, field visits are a substantial part of our business. The ride sharing part, of course, suffered, but deliveries and field visits did very well. And what did really well was people automating more and more. So Hypertrack, the primary reason to use Hypertrack is using location to drive automations, to drive productivity, efficiency, um, customer delight through automation, and there was a huge tailwind around that.
Fantastic. The other nuance about Hypertrack is that it's a truly global company, right? So you're based in the Bay Area and you're global from day zero, day one. Sorry. Um, Again, I mean, what are some of those nuances of building a truly global company, right? Where you're selling to the world from day one itself. How does it
Yeah.
differ from, let's say, a staggered sort of a go-to market where you capture one region and then go to another and another and so on?
Absolutely. And that was a very important sort of DNA level thing for us, is be global first from day one. Our first version that launched in 2015, I think the phrase we used was, if you live in a part of the world which is digitally mapped and you use a smartphone which has Android or iOS on it, then Hypertrack will work for you. And every part of the world is digitally mapped and uses Android and iOS. And um, I sort of understood the value of that decision. Um, and we also realized that language, script, and stuff matters less. We live in a world in Unicode as an API product. Much of what you see is your own data that you've input into our APIs, and it's Unicode. We see our product screenshots with Arabic and Chinese and Thai and Vietnamese on it, and Hindi on it. And it's just fascinating, right? That we didn't even put a whole lot of effort, and it's fairly international because technology has sort of risen to the occasion there. So the benefit it had for us is we had a business which did not require country-wise supplier or licenses or any such thing. Within reason, right? I mean, sure, mapping has some regulation, but more or less, there was no, we didn't need to have a bank account or a telecom relationship or some such thing in every country. And post-COVID, it's much easier to understand that most companies don't need local offices to sell to local customers. They need to understand the local culture. They need to understand regulation. They need to understand laws, how business is done, um, the psychology of the customers, the value system, etc. But they do not need to physically be there. And in that sense, our business ended up being pretty future-proof. And it's quite liberating that you don't have to bet which region is the growth in. Wherever growth happens in the world, it's a fast-changing, dynamic, flat world. You kind of get to ride that wave. And we also ended up building more awareness campaigns which were geography agnostic. And many of these were things we serendipitously chanced upon, where we just said, oh, maybe that medium will work well for us. And it so happened that that medium was also global. It was built in the US, for example, that medium, but it was getting us a lot of love from Singapore, from Southeast Asia. And we just realized how global the world has become when it comes to information. So there's no reason our product should not be global first.
Right. I have more than a couple of questions in terms of how your teams operate in that paradigm, right?
Right.
For example, like demand, right? So how do you So what does the team do? I mean, do they like focus on any particular geography, or do they just focus on a broad horizontal? And how does that sort of impact your efforts, and so on and so forth?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and this is something we came to terms with only recently, post COVID, where before COVID, I was especially fierce about we have to be in the same office. You can't really build a great product without having a whiteboard and being able to smell each other's breath, right? And you need to have that. And if we have a remote, so we have a San Francisco team, we have a Ukraine team, we have some folks in India as well, and we were fiercely built around each one place needs to have an office and people come to the office and so on. After COVID, and in fact, our Ukraine team had this culture of working from home even before COVID. So they were sort of resisting that. And San Francisco team largely had consensus, but a few folks wanted more flexibility. Post COVID, everybody started working remotely, and it worked out beautifully. And I was quite surprised, thinking, even if I go back to the office, it's just like Slack, right? You sitting across from each other because there's no cubicles and stuff in this new age work format, now old, but you end up slacking each other and DMing each other sitting right across from each other. Similarly, if we were to show up in a room, we are likely to use a Miro board or a Trello or an Asana uh, to collaborate rather than on a Google Meet or a Zoom, rather than walk up to the whiteboard, because the digital tools there are actually quite good, and now everybody's learned how to use it and in an effective way. Um, so um, so now it was a moment of revelation, saying, okay, we don't have to be in the same room, and what does that do for us? So in our new hiring and talent acquisition, now the world has opened up. US time zone doesn't overlap with the rest of the world as much as, let's say, Europe, which overlaps with Southeast Asia as well as the West Coast in some meaningful way. And now you have good sales, marketing, biz dev talent sitting in Europe who knows how to sell SaaS products. And you have great talent sitting in India who's able to do that. So suddenly the world opens up, saying, wait, why am I competing with billion-dollar unicorns in the Bay Area um, for sales and marketing talent? I could get it anywhere in the world. And if our customers prefer to interact with us digitally, then there's no reason why we should not interact with each other digitally, or build a team that is able to meet the customer where they are, right, in their time zone, in the format that they prefer.
Right. Wonderful. I know we're at the top of the hour. I have a last couple of questions, if
Sure.
you have some time. Yeah.
Wow, it's been an hour. I can't believe I rambled for an hour.
No, no, it's been fun. It's been real fun actually. So, I've watched your wonderful TED talk on building businesses in US and India, right? Where you compared the
Hmm,
experience to the sequoia and the banyan trees. I was wondering, with how hyper connected the world we live in is, and given how much osmosis has happened between ecosystems, right?
hmm.
Have the sequoia and banyan trees kind of morphed into each other right now, or do you notice any change?
It's a good question, and obviously it's a question I've grappled with. So that TED talk happened, and then in the book, in the Golden Tap as well, I wrote about US India and US India China culture contrast. It seems to me, it's a bit of an anticlimactic answer, but it seems to me that digital businesses end up being like sequoias. So to the extent that there are more digital businesses scaling up in a sort of technology scale way, um, the playbook for that, or the design for that, is the sequoia type of growth. Like the banyan tree growth is possible or desirable, preferable when it's more offline or a traditional way of growing. Maybe it's a people-driven way of growing, right? It's still relevant to grow in people-driven way, but much of the growth, especially post-COVID, that we've seen is all technology, and technology growth takes the shape of a sequoia.
Right. Interesting. Um, you released your book, The Golden Tap, in late 2015 at the height of the consumer internet or e-commerce frenzy in India, right? And we're right now talking at a time when six unicorns emerged last week alone, right?
Yeah.
Pretty wild times actually. So how are the present times different from what you saw earlier?
Sure. It's a great question. It's I I was short answer is I was much more worried about the unicorns and the funding in 2015, 2014 in the India market specifically than I am about the growth now. And let me draw the right equivalent here. Even in the Golden Tap, I said I am much more bullish about the US unicorns than I am about the Indian unicorns. Much more bullish about the Chinese unicorns than I am about the Indian unicorns. So it was the first real bubble that was truly Indian, right? There was a lot to learn. There were a lot of things which many people just did not know, and they were misattributing to stuff. So the bubble dynamics were much more in 2014, 2015. While we had our internet bubble burst in 99, 2000, some companies got impacted. Then we had our financial crisis bubble 2000, 2008 in India, where a few more companies were impacted, but still substantially lesser than, US 99, 2000, US 2000 internet bubble burst was very similar to India 2014, 2015 unicorn bubble. But now that we've been through that, it's been a much deeper market. The level of digitization, the depth in the market, the quality of entrepreneurs, the quality of teams, the maturity of teams, the maturity of investors investing in them is at a different level. I think is an order of magnitude different. So yes, there is froth. Yes, valuations are out of whack. But it's not as concerning as it was in 2014, 2015.
Right. Is that because I think the ecosystem is a lot more mature right now. Do you see that?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so too. Because
Exactly. It's maturity of ecosystem. It's in every way, right? Capital is smarter. Entrepreneurs are smarter. Many of them who've been through bus cycles before.
Yeah.
People, the teams at large building this smarter. The consumer is smarter. The consumer, as in, there is the end consumer, but a lot of in India digitization is about the middleman, and the population of traders, brokers, middlemen in India, and their consumption patterns are equivalent to many of the developed nations and their consumer base. Right? You have tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions, of buyers who are spending as much money as a US or Europe consumer would, and that's a sizable market. So much of the depth in digitization is happening with brokers, retailers, resellers, the business people, and that is pretty deep, and that's a savvy buyer who's and who's truly started to pay for stuff. Right? It's not just investor money going in to buy their business for free and flip it to someone else later.
Right. I think many different markets have simply opened up in the last 5 years, right? If you look at it, I still remember a time when, selling software to SMBs in India was an anathema, right? It was the most frustrating thing you could think of. There were hardly a couple of examples, like let's say Tally or Zoho, who had done that fantastically. But right now, you have a whole bunch of people, Khatabook, Razorpay, etc., who are offering this sort of business in a box, what Stripe is doing in the US. to these guys, and then the whole Bharat user as well, the additional 300-400 million users who've come on the internet thanks to the Geo revolution, right? So
Yeah.
I think bigger market, more mature ecosystem. I think that's the key differentiation in some sense. Yeah.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. So Kashyap, before we close, what do you have coming up next? What are you optimistic for going forward into the future? And, what should we be looking out for in terms of Hypertrack?
Oh, sure. Yeah. My favorite topic. I could talk for hours about this. So, we've hit early signs of product market fit, and I'm sort of operating under the playbook that until you get to product market fit, do everything to get to product market fit. But once you're at product market fit, do everything to grow and scale the business. So I have recently switched my brain to get into growth mode. We're riding pretty good growth. We've been growing 20% month over month for the last 12 months in revenue. And I believe revenue is a trailing indicator of success. So the next several months of similar cumulative monthly growth, 20% CMGR sounds modest. If you add it up for 12 months, that's 8x. And if we're looking to sort of continue that trend over the next 1-2 years, and hopefully for a much longer time, and that makes me very excited and optimistic about Hypertrack's future. It's been we've had to pay our dues. We had a couple of false starts and had to reinvent ourselves as a company and as a team more than the product and market. And the market pull has always been there. The thesis has always been there. And I'm looking forward to riding the growth curve now.
Fantastic. One of the things that strikes me in our conversation is how well studied you are on the circumstance itself, right? I mean, your ability to kind of abstract yourself away from the situation and kind of study that objectively and take decisions is phenomenal. So this has been a super fun chat, Kashyap. Thank you so much for making the time. I truly appreciate it and hope we can speak again sometime soon.
Oh, thank you, Roshan. Thanks a lot. I hope your viewers find this useful.
Absolutely, I'm sure they will. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked this episode, then don't forget to subscribe to us on your favorite platform and share this episode with all of your fellow startup operators. Also, follow the Startup Operator on LinkedIn and Twitter for more updates. Stay safe, take care, and see you soon on a brand new episode of the Startup Operator.